The mission of the hospital itself is to reach the peoples of the Sierra Madre with excellent care to show them the love of Christ. And I think that's what we strive to do. We strive to give excellent care so that they can know that there's somebody who cares for them.
So my name is Jessee Bustinza and I'm a pediatrician.
My name is Willy Bustinza. My wife Jessee and I work as physicians in Hospital Mission Tarahumara.
My story is a little unique, just like my husband Willy's. I come from a mission family, and I actually moved to Peru when I was 6 months old. Willy and I met in Peru when we were 3 and 5 years old, and so we have a really wonderful legacy of parents and grandparents who have modeled missions for us. God called me into medical missions when I was 15 years old. I was actually in southern Peru in a church during a prayer meeting when an 8.4 earthquake on the Richter scale hit, and actually the roof of the church lifted off in front of us, and people began to pray fervently, and it was an incredibly crazy experience. Several miles to the coast, there was actually a tidal wave that occurred in a very impoverished city, and I went with the Red Cross to help. And I remember seeing refugee tents put up by the Red Cross, and there were 6 families crowded in these very small living spaces. And I remember driving by those and thinking, writing in my journal that day, God, I feel like I'm stinking of money. I said, use my life any way that you want.
Our calling starts, at least mine starts even before I was born. My father, he is also of indigenous origin. He was born in Peru in the highlands of Peru near Cusco, a very, very poor family. When he was 7, his mom passed away from an unknown disease. And when he was 10, his dad passed away as he became an alcoholic after his wife died. And he died from alcoholism. And so my dad was an orphan at the age of 10. And he was taken to the big city by his uncle and was raised there, but always had a void in his heart. He missed his parents very much, and one day after he finished high school, he decided that he was going to take his life. And as he was planning on taking his life, a man came to him and told him about Jesus. And that day my dad made a decision for the Lord. And his uncle actually told him that he couldn't stay in the house, because if he was a Christian, he couldn't stay in the house. So my dad left his house at a young age and continued to serve the Lord, and he became a pastor. And so I was born in that family, with that family of faith and with the love for the Lord. And from a very young age, I knew that God was calling me also to the ministry. I didn't know exactly what that looked like. I told people I wanted to be a doctor and I wanted to be a pastor.
And I felt like that day he called me into medical missions. I initially went to nursing school. I worked for 3 years as a pediatric ICU nurse until the Lord called me and my husband together into medical school at Oklahoma State University. We have always had the desire to become full-time medical missionaries. First, we spent 2 years in Mexico at Hospital Mission Tarahumara with the Samaritan's Purse post-residency program, and now we're thrilled to return to Mexico through Christian Health Service Corps.
At the hospital, I'm a general surgeon. Also, I have been appointed the chief of medical staff. So even though it's a small hospital, I'm still chief of medical staff. I am in charge of lab and x-rays, and so I've taken really a variety of roles throughout the time that I've been there at the hospital. Because my main desire is to serve the hospital, to serve the people at the hospital, the physicians who are working there, enable them to reach their calling, and so that we can all serve the Tarahumara and show them the love of Christ.
It has certainly been a challenge balancing bedtime stories and an emergency trauma surgery. As a dual physician couple with very young children, we have 2-year-old Lucy, who will be returning to Mexico, and now 4-month-old baby Caroline. And we are so thrilled that they get to have that experience growing up on the mission field, as we both did, but it is a challenge.
Honestly, amazing for our family to be there. as Jess and I were talking before we came, is how the gift that God has given us to not only raise our children in the mission field, but to instill in them again the life of faith that we experienced as children, because that's what we want to. That's the legacy that we want to build for them, and that we want to leave for them.
Even though I spent 7 years growing up in Mexico, I was never prepared for the degree of extreme poverty we see in the Copper Canyon. The Copper Canyon is a very geographically isolated place. It actually takes us 5 hours to drive to the nearest grocery store. The Tarahumara have lived in isolation for nearly 500 years, and their culture has remained largely unchanged. Because of that, they don't have access to modern medical care, clean water, sufficient food, medications.
And so we provide a service to them, which is a very much of an underserved population with malnutrition rates that equal the worst of the world, and maternal and infant mortality, last I heard, in the top 10 of the world. So we are trying to fill a need there and bring the love of Christ to the Tarahumara Indians.
And it's a multifactorial issue. There's educational deficits, there's cultural practices that are contributing to that, and just food scarcity. In fact, a recent survey we did showed that a Tarahumara child may just consume 300 calories per day on average. You can imagine day after day of a food deficit like that is going to lead to some pretty severe malnutrition. We've had 2-year-olds coming in, 3-year-olds weighing 10, 11, 12 pounds, and it is really tragic. But we're focusing on equipping parents with the tools and the knowledge to reverse that cycle in their communities.
In their view, in their worldview, God is not somebody who loves you. God is not somebody who's looking out for you. They do many parties and many different rituals to appease God, so He can send them rain, so He can give them food. Because if God is mad, then He's gonna send a drought. So they go to great lengths and spend all their money during these festivities because they want to appease God. So their concept of God is not the same concept that we have, and that's what we are up to. We're trying to change our entire worldview so that these people can come to know Christ. So we're doing it through health evangelism, through healthcare, so that they know that by the way we treat them, by the way we smile at them, by the way we have the hospital set up, it's a very welcoming place for them. Unlike any other hospital that they've seen in their lives with the government, very much unlike the traditional healers they have. We are trying to show them the love of Christ that way and change the culture.
I think that a really big challenge for us going to the mission field is being overwhelmed by the sense of need, the degree of disease and death and suffering, and sometimes feeling isolated, perhaps unprepared. They didn't teach me this in medical school. We have found ourselves researching how to treat tiger bites and infected donkey bites, and how to use an ultrasound probe to look through an eyeball to look for elevated intracranial pressure. And through all of that, you just realize how hard you need to lean on the Lord every day as a missionary healthcare provider, and to remember that He's not surprised by any of that, and He has prepared you for that. And He's with you, and I like to think that He's that second set of hands. As I'm touching a patient, He's there with me. And so in the midst of those challenges, I feel that He's made us even stronger and more resilient in our dependency on Him, perhaps not even in our competency, but in our dependency on Him. And because of that, we're seeing miraculous recoveries, and we're seeing, more importantly, people being touched, not just in a physical way, but receiving an inner spiritual healing that they needed.